So I've been thinking about the decline of the United States, and it's really a decline along four dimensions. Let's start from the economy. In 1945, the United States GDP was 50% of the world's GDP, roughly. And in 2025, it's 16% in PPP, maybe a little more in nominal value. China is 19% officially, if you believe Chinese statistics. Anyway, the United States share of the GDP is obviously much smaller. Now, if you ask economists, they will tell you the United States has the best economy in the world, in the developed world. So that sounds like a contradiction. Well, it's not, because everything is relative, and I will keep saying this for other for the other kinds of decline. Right now, China is in a worse, much worse economic situation, and Europe is a congenital mess. But the United States has lost the economic power they used to have. More important for me and for many historians is that the government debt of the United States is $36 trillion. And there's no sign the politicians of either party want to stop overspending. They stay in power pretty much by buying votes of the people. History teaches us that great empires collapsed because of government debt. Look at Spain, look at France, and look at Britain. So that's the most, in my opinion, the most significant economic factor when you analyze the economic decline or ascent of a country. Now, second kind of decline is just power. Again, you can think that it is not true, but everything is relative. The decline in power of the United States is not visible, because the decline of the power of China is equivalent or even worse, and the decline in power of Russia is very rapid. And then if you look around, the European Union has largely withdrawn from the world scene, and Latin America never mattered much, and the Islamic world is congenital mess. I'm very skeptic it will ever return to be what it was 1,000 years ago. India is a longer story, but anyway, right now it doesn't exert power outside its borders. So then it feels like the United States is still the world power, but its power is declining. And this has actually, sometimes it's better to have a simple explanation for complex issues. In my opinion, a major reason for the decline of the United States is just the presidents. The United States had some great presidents in the past. Certainly between Roosevelt and George H. Bush, the first Bush. And we can argue, and you may like or not like some of the policies of these presidents, but I think they had a view of the world, and that view of the world somehow worked. And again, we can have different opinions. I have never been a fan of Ronald Reagan. I think it caused a lot of problems. He supported Saddam Hussein in Iraq. under his watch, the United States funded Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan who were fighting the Soviet Union. He's the first one to grant immunity to millions of illegal immigrants. I can go on and on. But anyway, between Roosevelt and Bush 1, the presidents did a pretty good job of preserving and increasing the power of the United States. Of course, the collapse of the Soviet Union probably represents the peak of power, world power of the United States. And then you had Bill Clinton, who was just lucky. He inherited a world without the Cold War. And then George W. Bush was one of the worst ever. In my opinion, a man with a very low IQ. Then Obama, in my opinion, was a good man but mediocre. And then you had Trump, probably the worst of all of them for many reasons. And Biden didn't really change my opinion on the decline of the quality of US president. So that's a very simple reason why the decline of the presidents of the world power of the United States happened. Now, let me mention right away something important. Bill Clinton was actually elected with less than 50% of the votes. There were 3 candidates, and because of the way the United States elects president, he became president without having 50% of the vote. And then his successor was George W. Bush, Bush II, who lost the election to Al Gore. Today, by the way, we know and many studies show that actually that election was really stolen. But anyway, he lost even without the stealing in Florida, which is a long story. Bush became president on a technicality of how the United States elects presidents, but he got fewer votes than Gore, and nobody ever disputed this. And then you had Trump in 2016. He became president even if he lost the election by, I believe, 3 million votes, which is a gigantic loss. So that's something we have to analyze, because it's one of the main reasons for the decline of the United States in every sense. The Constitution of the United States is undemocratic. The Constitution of the United States was written by about 50 wealthy white men, who half of them were slave owners. They had no intention of giving women the right to vote, and certainly no intention of giving blacks, the slaves, the right to vote. And it has some weird things in it. I'll say in a second why. I can say it right away why for a long time we thought the United States Constitution was such an amazing achievement, because everything is relative, and relative to the rest of the world, the United States had the best constitution for a long time, so it worked very well. Anyway, the United States is a non-democratic country from the beginning because of many technicalities. So the first one, and now very famous, is the Electoral College, which before Trump, I think people didn't even know this issue. The United States, the one who gets the most votes doesn't necessarily become president. There's something called the Electoral College. Each state gets a number of, let's call them grand electors, and they are the ones who elect the president. And so because of this, depending, and each state, most states assign all their grand electors to the one who gets the most votes within the state. So it's a strange algorithm, but the result is that the one who loses could win. In the previous 200 years, it happened rarely. In the last, in the 21st century, it has already happened twice. And then there's the Senate. The Senate is another bizarre algorithm. It assigns 2 senators to each state. And when the United States was born, that made sense because the states were roughly the same size. Today you have Wyoming that I believe has 600,000 people, maybe even fewer. Alaska, 700,000. Montana, 1 million. California, 40 million. Well, Wyoming gets 2 senators, California gets 2 senators. So a citizen of Wyoming is about 80 times more powerful in the Senate than a citizen of California. Wildly undemocratic. And the Senate creates all sorts of issues. The rest of the world is puzzled when the United States passes laws that seem to be prehistoric. But that's because the Senate represents states that are not exactly progressive, small rural states, and they have a lot of power. And then the Supreme Court, which is another incredibly bizarre thing. The judges of the Supreme Court is very important. It decides, it's the ultimate decision maker about laws. And the judges of the Supreme Court are appointed basically randomly. The algorithm there is really random. It depends on who is president when one of the judges dies or retires. That's it. And recently it's been deaths. So a judge dies, whoever is president gets to nominate a new judge. So Trump, I think, had 3. Obama had, I remember, 1. Random. It's depends who is president at the time. And then they're in charge for the rest of their life, potentially, unless they retire. So anyway, the Constitution of the United States is undemocratic. Now, there's a reason. The founding fathers of the United States were afraid of democracy, and some of them put it in writing. It's not just my opinion. But it worked very well. For a long time, it worked very well. But again, everything's relative. It worked very well relative to the forms of government that the rest of the world had. And now the effect today is what we see. There's this general erratic, casual, sometimes crazy approach to government. And the consequences of electing presidents in these ways is catastrophic. Think of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I was no fan of Saddam Hussein. I was happy when Saddam Hussein was removed. But the whole war in Iraq started in 2003 because George W. Bush was president. And he was president by accident. He had lost that election, but the Electoral College made him president. So these undemocratic technicalities have a huge impact. And today Donald Trump is escaping prosecution because the Supreme Court was basically works for him. Why? Because he appointed 3 of them. So the undemocratic Constitution of the United States has consequences that can be really grotesque. Now, the United States became a democracy, even if the Constitution... So, the Founding Fathers didn't believe in democracy. They were afraid, many of them were afraid of democracy. And they had a point. In fact, the history of the United States has proven that they were right about being worried. If you go back, how did the parties pick their candidates? Well, it was probably kind of a meeting more or less secret meeting in a club of the elite, and they would pick somebody. Then the United States launched the primaries, where people get to vote. People registered for each party get to vote and pick the candidates, and this has resulted in a very extreme. The one who wins tends to be the one who has extreme views, because before he or she can win the election in the country, she or he has to win the election within the party, and so it's more radical. It sounds weird, but the more you democratize the country, the more candidates tend to be extreme, not necessarily competent, and certainly not necessarily looking for compromise. If you in a primary, if you say I want to compromise, most likely you don't get nominated, you don't get picked as the candidate. Another thing that, in my opinion, is weakening governments, not only in the United States, also in Europe, in pretty much all the democracies increasingly, is that democracy has an effect on the rule of law. The United States has really become a country of the rule of law, and so has Europe. Now, I know this will sound unpleasant, but before, when the rule of law was not really enforced, when there was a lot of corruption, smart people had the motivation to become politicians. You could make a lot of money being a politician. You, your friends, your family, your tribe. As you enforce the rule of law, politicians become just salaried employees of the state. This actually reduces the motivation for bright people to become a politician. If you want to get rich, don't become a politician. Launch a tech startup, or quite simply become a dentist, a lawyer. There are many professions where people become much richer than in politics. So a side effect of the rule of law that we all love, I love it, is that it's hard to motivate bright people to become politicians, and then you have this class of politicians, both in the United States and in Europe and in Canada, who are fundamentally mediocre. They are not very intelligent. Even if they are intelligent, their motivation to act for the long-term good of the country is low. Their motivation is to be re-elected. That's their job. Their job is the politician, and they want to preserve their job. And the most effective way to preserve your job is to do something that gives results short-term, very short-term, because the elections are in 2 years. So that's the issue. Myself, I made proposals to politicians, and the people involved told me what is his short-term benefit. What does he get next year when there are elections? And so whether my proposal was good for society, for the country, for the future of the human race, that's irrelevant. The most important thing is, will it get him re-elected? Now, coming to Trump. Trump won. This time he really won. It was, I admit it, I wrote an article about it, the greatest comeback, political comeback in recent times. Now, one thing to remember, he won twice against women. Okay? He lost big time when he was running against a white man, Joe Biden, who was not exactly the most popular politician in the country. But Biden won against Trump. A white man won against Trump. Two women, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, didn't make it. Trump prevailed. So again, sometimes I like simple explanations for complex problems. Um, Remember this: maybe just the United States is not a country ready to have a woman as president, and I think Kamala Harris knew this. She knew that a woman starts with a handicap of 3%, maybe 5%. Yeah, why I know she knew? Because she never wore a skirt. She was always wearing pants. Anyway, that's besides the point. Now, before I get really into Trump, let me say something more about democracy. I made a note for myself, and then I forgot. Why democracy? Democracy has obviously limitations, and now that we have a real democracy, both in the United States and Europe, we pay a price. Think of the creation of wealth. I mean, everybody cares so much about their economic conditions, but it's hard to name a creation of wealth that happened because of a referendum. In fact, the opposite. Many referendums, once you let people decide in a referendum, you have to be careful. It's people make decisions that can be really harmful in the long term. Any country that had a referendum on nuclear power lost. The anti-nuclear movement always wins these referendums. I mean, and that's debatable if that's good for. I mean, my native country of Italy is in big trouble and has probably the most expensive energy in the world because twice the government let them decide on nuclear power, and twice they voted against it. The result is that now Italy buys nuclear power, energy produced by nuclear power plants in Switzerland, maybe France, and so on. So, on the other hand, think of the creations of wealth that happen in the world. Silicon Valley or Detroit. Go back to Detroit. Did anybody ask the people of Detroit, do you want to have a car industry? Did anybody ask the people of Santa Clara Valley, do you want to have the semiconductor industry? No. If they had, probably the people of Santa Clara Valley would have said, no, we want something to help the existing orchards. So it's hard to find a creation of wealth in the world that was due to democracy. In the free world, it was usually individuals. And we can discuss, the contribution of scientists, inventors, and so on. In the world of dictators, think of a recent success story, China, the biggest economic boom of the last 40-50 years, except for the last few years. Well, that everything was decided by the Chinese Communist Party, by the dictator, not through a referendum, not by the 1.4 billion citizens of China. And think of the effects of democracy, this the widespread disinformation. We thought the internet would democratize many things, and the internet has become, precisely because it is so democratic, has become a place where fake news prevail. We're really going back to the medieval world of legends and superstitions. With a more democratic world, you have a more politicized society, where everything becomes politicized, even wearing masks, the vaccines, the very existence of the COVID, of the virus, was politicized. The many right-wing organizations said it's a hoax, it doesn't exist. Anyway, back to Trump. I see. First of all, I see it as the Caligula moment. Caligula was a mad Roman emperor, and after Caligula came Nero. There was somebody in between. I see that as the Caligula moment of the United States empire. Erratic, mad, um, and okay, we'll talk about the Roman Empire later. um, Trump is ignorant, is not patriotic, megalomaniac, uh, easily bribable, vindictive, uh, resentful of the rule of law. In my opinion, he has no worldview. He just mainly cares about himself in very strange ways, because I don't think he's completely sane. So what's going to be the effect of the Trump presidency? Well, number one, I fear that the United States will become a kleptocracy, a Putin-style kleptocracy. I fear that money, look at the people Trump appointed, one billionaire after the other. Money is basically staging a coup, taking over the government of the United States, and proximity to Trump will determine where the money goes. Second, the United States has become a world power because of its alliances. If you look carefully, the United States never won a war without its allies. Lost in Vietnam, lost in Korea, lost in Afghanistan. It won World War I, World War II, because it had this. It was part of an alliance with Britain and France, many other countries. It won the Cold War against the Soviet Union because NATO was such a colossal alliance. So one thing that so Trump is going to weaken the alliances one way or another. He's already done it. I mean, I'm sure that the best European politicians are already thinking how to get out of NATO. And nobody trusts the United States anymore. It's just doesn't matter what Trump does today for your country. It's obvious he doesn't have moral values. Anyway, the other thing that Trump will probably do is weaken the deep state. He has been attacking the deep state since the beginning. Now that's one of those funny things where the left become the right. The deep state was the paranoia, the enemy of the left, of the socialist. And now it has become the paranoia of the right. Well, the deep state actually was good, mostly, because the deep state is simply a big, look, you can see it as a big corporation, where most people are competent, honest, they do their job, and by the way, they're not rich, they're paid relatively little, they're not corrupt. And they really, the deep state represents the institutions that made America work. And for example, the deep state is the one that cares about the alliances, because the people within the deep state know what I just said, that the United States is only a big nuclear Mexico without its alliance, without its allies. And I can go on. The deep state is actually useful. It's a great countries have great bureaucracies, and countries with weak, bad bureaucracies don't have a future. Anyway, then Trump will have another effect on the freedom of press, I fear. You can see it. Yeah, I mean, obviously Twitter, X, now Facebook, and they're all quickly aligned themselves with Trump. Even my favorite comedians, I watch their TV shows, and except for one or two, suddenly they're not so they're not targeting Trump as much as he deserves, because he keeps saying incredibly stupid things that lend themselves to comedy, but they don't do it anymore. By the way, another example of how presidents who don't trust the deep state can make big mistakes is China. When Trump decided to go after China, in my opinion, simply to distract from his collusion with Russia. But anyway, when he decided to go after China, he slapped the sanctions, which the tariffs on China, which basically are a tax on the United States consumer, and certainly were one of the causes of inflation with the government debt. Those were, in my opinion, the two biggest causes of inflation. But then also that was the Sputnik moment for China. China, for decades, had been very happy with letting the United States do all the research, take all the risks in research. And China was very happy to simply use the result of the research. And when Trump attacked China, China suddenly realized we need our own research. And they started doing their own research. And guess what? Now they're making their own chips, which are almost as good as the chips of Silicon Valley. And they, in my opinion, they make better electric vehicles than Tesla. They taken over the solar, the whole green tech industry. So I can go on, and you will see more and more success of China in basic research. So I think the deep state would have been much more careful than Trump was. We literally woke up the giant that was sleeping. Anyway, so what's the risk? Ultimate risk. I always smile when I hear United States gurus, people on pundits on TV talking about the problems of the European Union, or preaching the European Union. Trump is one of them. When the United States has much bigger problems. I understand. They say the European Union is a weak federation of states. My God, the United States risks splitting in two. Blue states and red states have such fundamentally different views of the world, of the future, of even moral values. The polarization in the United States is way bigger than Europe. In Europe, people switch from right wing, left wing overnight. In the United States, it's becoming really almost religious belief. Then the United States has, in my opinion, a bigger gridlock than Europe. It's really hard to pass any kind of reform. Think of immigration reform. Primary education in the United States is collapsing. The universities are still the best in the world. Not for long, because China is catching up again because of the Sputnik moment caused by Trump. But anyway, the children of the United States don't compare in education with the children of Europe, of Japan, of China, and the United States will pay a price at some point. Then you have the problem, by the way, I don't want to get into abortion, but the United States is going backwards compared with the rest of the world. Then you have the problem of guns, which make the United States society less and less appealing. Not many immigrants want to move in a country where you are 40 times more likely to be murdered than in some European countries. Government debt, again, is escalating. It's not as big as in some European countries, but the Europeans get something out of that government debt. And they get very good, maybe too good benefits. Free healthcare is the most famous, but so many. By the way, high-speed trains. The United States still lives in the age of the airplane. And then then people were making fun that Europe had this wave of right-wing parties. The one that that is in power is in Italy, and Giorgia Meloni is definitely not a fascist as she was described in the United States press. And the one in Europe who is a little dictatorial is Orban in Hungary, but that's peanuts compared with Donald Trump. The United States now has the most right-wing, in my opinion, neo-fascist political leader. Now, the decline of the United States is not good news because it will probably cause more wars. Why I say that? Because the great periods of peace are always when there is a superpower that makes war unlikely and not convenient. So that's the case of the British Empire. British Empire and French Empire, you could travel around the world with just a business card. The Mongol Empire, you could travel from China to Europe relatively safe. That was the case of the United States after World War II. Europe hasn't had a war. The European powers haven't been at war since World War II because of the United States Empire. If the United States declines and there's no superpower that takes its place, and I don't think there is, because the others are declining faster, then I think the chances for war will increase. Incidentally, I skipped India at one point. Watch out for India. I was asking a friend, what would you do if China, country with 1.4 billion people, cracked down on its Muslim population, arrested the main opposition leader, assassinated a dissident in Canada, tried to assassinate another one in the United States, cracked down on separatist movements, I don't even know how many, violated the Russia, the sanctions against Russia, basically helped Russia avoid the sanctions, and had already fought a number of wars, 3 with Pakistan, 1 with China, sent troops in Sri Lanka, and so on. And of course the reaction was, well, if China did that, we would take action. Well, India did that, okay? Modi's India has done all of this. And it is now the most populated country in the world, 1.4 billion people. Now, what are the remedies to what I said? Well, first of all, the decline of the United States is not inevitable. In fact, at one point I wanted to talk about the Roman Empire, but it's a long story. After Caligula and Nero, the Roman Empire had 3 great emperors, at least 3 of the famous 5, and probably the maximum extension. So it's not inevitable, but something has to change, of course. And in a democracy, I think that's the difference. The Roman Empire was not a democratic system. Certainly, there's something weird in the world. Think of the United Nations, which is a paradox. There's countries that have veto power. Think of France and Britain, teeny countries, they have veto power. Japan doesn't. Germany doesn't. 3rd or 4th largest economies in the world. Russia has veto power. India doesn't. 1.4 billion people doesn't. There's no Muslim country that has veto power. So there's something, of course, weird in the United Nations. The European Union is a hope because I see moral values stronger in Europe. By the way, I didn't say that. Yeah, I'll say that shortly. The European Union, I see the stronger values, and a better world view. In my opinion, should keep enlarging. So not only Ukraine, but some visionary politician in Europe should start talking about expanding to the Middle East, Israel, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, Northern Africa, and Lebanon, Syria, maybe even Iran. I feel that the regime in Iran is so weak, and if the regime collapses, I think Iran will become a westernized country. The other decline I didn't discuss was the moral decline in the United States. There was a great generation. Now we have a little generation. The United States, if you look, when the United States was fighting fascism, about 60% of the country was very committed to fighting fascism. When the United States fought communism, it was 80%. I don't know. And when it was everybody, right and left. Yes, even the left. And now that there are actually bigger threats to the United States, climate change, their commitment is very low. Climate change is a favorite example because the consumption of single-use plastic and air conditioning, all these things, gasoline, they're skyrocketing actually. The luxuries of the previous generation become the necessities of the new generation. So there's also a clear decline in the willingness of the United States to sacrifice for an idea. Anyway, it's not inevitable.